welcome back, everybody, with another episode of Psi Games Talks. I'm here with my co-host, Tyler, and we are with a special guest, Rupert Sheldrake, today. And we're super excited to have him. I've been following his work for a very long time. And as you know, we at Psi Games Talks, we are talking about all of the different aspects of Psi, all of the different aspects of consciousness with some of the professionals in the field. So without further ado, I would like to just give a brief introduction to Rupert, and then I would like him to he'll take over from there, and then we'll go. So Rupert Sheldrake is a scientist who has spent decades asking questions most people are afraid to ask. He is a biologist and author known for exploring how memory, learning, and consciousness may extend beyond the brain and even beyond individuals. He's best known for his theory of a morphic resonance, which suggests that nature has a memory, and that once patterns of behavior or learning emerge, they can influence similar systems across space and time. His work challenges deeply held assumptions about how reality works and invites us to look at science not as a fixed set of answers, but as an evolving inquiry. Whether you agree with him or not, Rupert has played a key role in opening serious conversation about consciousness, collective learning, and human potential, making him a powerful voice for a gathering like the Psi Games, where we explore matters as much as explanation. Please join us in welcoming Rupert Sheldrake. Hello, Rupert.
Hello, Hakeem.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever I didn't hit in that intro, and then let the audience know about you?
Well, it was pretty comprehensive. I spent a lot of my time doing research. Sorry, there was there's a lot of noise then. Is there anything to worry about?
No, I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
We can cut it. We can start it from wherever you like, and I can cut that part out. But yeah, I didn't know what that was.
Oh yes, okay. I spend a lot of my time doing research, and I'm doing research on several areas that have long been of interest to me. One is the extended mind, the idea of the mind is extended beyond the brain in every act of vision. I mean, this is not something particularly esoteric. I'm suggesting every time we look at something, the images we're seeing are exactly where they seem to be, outside our heads, not inside our heads. Mm. The official view is that when I look at your image now on my screen, Hakeem, that the image of you and the screen and the computer it's on are represented inside my brain. Light comes into the eyes, changes in the retina, impulses up the nerves into the brain. And then a little Hakeem appears inside my head. I then project imaginatively in a virtual reality display, which is also in my head, to imagine that you're actually out there. Now, what I'm suggesting is so simple, it's rather hard to understand, which is that our images are just where they seem to be. They're not inside our heads. They're in our minds, but not in our brains. And most people take that for granted. But if they've been educated, especially in science, they know that they're meant to believe it's all inside their head. So if you ask them, where are the images? Some of them will say, well, they're inside my head. But they behave as if they're not, because I think this is a really incredible theory. Anyway, the way of testing that theory is through the sense of being stared at, or scoposthesia, as it's called scientifically. Because if I'm projecting out images to what I look at, if I look at somebody from behind, they don't know I'm there, my mind's in a sense touching them. Could they feel it? And actually, of course, they do. I mean, people turn around and look back if you stare at them from behind. Not every time, but quite often, and 95% of the population, including children, have had this experience. So that's one reason that one of my research topics is scoposthesia, the sense of being stared at. And I've recently released an app so people can train themselves on that. We can come back to that, but let me just cover the other areas. One is telephone telepathy, where people pick up who's calling, and when the phone rings, before they answer it or look at the caller ID, they often just know who it is. And sometimes they say, "Oh, I was just thinking about you," and then you called. It's funny, I was just thinking about you. Again, about 85% of people have had that experience. It's very common. And I've done lots of research on that, and it's definitely for real. I recently published a meta-analysis of 26 different studies in 15 peer-reviewed papers, and the overall picture is very conclusive. So that's telephone telepathy. The third area is telepathy in animals. And I'm currently doing a project on cats that know when their owners are coming home. It's a sequel to my work on dogs that know when their owners are coming home, which was published in my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. Now I'm working on cats because no one's yet done a filmed study of cats. And so I'm recruiting cat owners at the moment to take part in this study. I don't think you'd ever have a live cat thing in your Psi Games, because I mean it is literally like
now we're talking.
herding cats. Yes. And then I have a long-standing interest in morphic resonance, as you know, memory and nature, and I have some experiments going on at the moment in a laboratory in Britain with bacteria, looking at the evolution of antibiotic resistance. Well, that's obviously highly specialized laboratory work that couldn't be in a Psi Games format. But I think the areas of my research that most overlap with your interests are the scoposthesia, the sense of being stared at, the telephone telepathy. I think those are areas where, these could perhaps be tested competitively. I mean, it would be exciting if they were.
I love all of that. And I also wanted to talk about one of the things that we have in my martial arts training, in my martial arts system, which is called ninjutsu, the art of the ninja. It's the 5th degree black belt test, the Godan test. Is this test called the Saki test. And it's basically where someone stands behind you with a sword, and we call it's killer intent. So the person behind you has to project this massive amount of intention to hurt you or to harm you. And then you as the student or the person who's testing has to pick up on that. So you have your eyes closed, you're sitting with your back to the person, and at some point they're going to come down with that sword. And you just have to know, you have to feel it and know when to get out of the way. And so the first time I did that test, the first 2 times I failed. And so to let everybody know that, I don't pass everything I try. I have to keep trying sometimes. I didn't succeed. I got hit. And it wasn't until the 3rd time, which was, every 6 months, you have to wait 6 months if you fail to try again. And on that 3rd time, I was able to move out of the way. But I couldn't tell you how I knew that it was the time. I just knew that it was the time. And it sounds very relatable to this idea of the staring. When I asked my teacher, like, what's going on there? It's like, he's like, I'll close my eyes and I'll project a certain image of wanting to harm you. And then I'll open my eyes. And when I open my eyes, that's when I shoot the projection right at you. And then either you feel it or you don't. And so to me, that kind of also add some credibility and proof in my own experience to what you're saying.
Well, thanks for telling me about that, Hakeem. I knew that in the martial arts people did train this ability, but that's a pretty severe form of training. I mean, if you get it wrong, you get hurt.
Now we use a foam sword, but back in the day, I mean, not too long ago, they used a bamboo sword, and not too long before that, they used a real sword. So I'm glad I'm not in that generation.
Well, you see, I think what I'm interested in at the moment is exactly that, training this ability, because I've done hundreds of thousands of trials, randomized trials, where these have been done in schools. Some were done in the Science Museum in Amsterdam. They had this experiment running for 25 years. And so lots of people have done it. And the basic experiment is one person sits behind another. The subject is blindfolded, and the person behind either stares at the back of their neck or looks away and thinks of something else in a random sequence. And there's a click or a beep that indicates when the trial begins. And within 10 seconds, you have to say looking or not looking, and you're right or you're wrong. And by chance, people would be right about 50% of the time. And over all this very large number of trials, the average hit rate is about 55%. It's not very impressively above chance, but it is very significant statistically and consistent. And people, there's an ability to detect this, which the test shows, but it's a very artificial test. It's really unlike how it happens in real life. And so you become self-conscious, and that inhibits the ability. So what I have at the moment is an app that works on smartphones. It's in the Apple and the Android app stores, called iSense Training, EYE Sense, iSense.training. And what this app does is you work in pairs. It tells the looker, when to look, and the person being looked at responds by saying yes or no, whether they're being looked at or not. And they can be blindfolded, and by just saying yes or no to the phone, it records their guess. And you do 20 trials in a test, and then it gives you your score. And then the idea is you do it repeatedly, and you get feedback from the app telling you whether your score's going up or not, whether you're getting 10 out of 20 is the chance level, and is it going up? So we've only just launched this, so I don't know whether people can actually get better at it yet, but that's the aim. And if anyone watching this is interested, then please do have a go. I have a website called sheldrake.org, and there's on the menu bar at the top, it says take part. And then you click on that and you go to the staring app. It explains it. There's a video demonstrating how to do the tests and how you can download the app, which is free. And so what I'm hoping is that people will be able to get better at this, to overcome the self-consciousness, and they'll have to train by, the real point of the training is to go with your feelings, not thinking. Like most psi tasks, if you think, it goes away. It's not about left brain thinking. It's about being able to intuitively feel the sensations, or just know what they are. You don't even have to be conscious of it. Like you said, you couldn't explain how you knew when the sword was going to come down. You just knew. That kind of level is what we're aiming for. And the reason I'm so interested in this is that if we had people who were good at it and could do it under, strict test conditions and get good scores, well, first of all, you could have a whole Psi Games section on finding who's best at it, and we could have a kind of competitive element. But from my point of view, if we have people who are good at it, they could be really helpful in this research. And we've got a budget where we can actually pay people who are good at it to take part in the research. Because there's a lot of questions we want to ask. For example, does it work when you look at people through mirrors? It's the real life studies suggest that people find it much harder to detect when they're being looked at through mirrors. But this way you could actually do experiments and find out just how much harder, and can you learn to detect it when you're looked at through mirrors. We already know that people aren't very good at detecting when they're looked at on screens. I've done experiments using FaceTime type technology, and people are looked at on screen by someone who's remote from them, and they have to guess if they're being looked at or not. And the results of that are pretty well at the chance level. So I think that this effect depends on physical light. I think it depends on actually looking through physical light, not just the image of somebody. So anyway, that's this project, and that's one of the main things I'm working on at the moment. I have a research assistant called Georgia, a young woman in Britain, who's coordinating a research group, and anyone who wants to be part of the research group, the scopaesthesia research group, can join it. It requires a commitment to doing at least 10 of these tests, so you get some experience of what it's about before being part of this research group, which includes discussions. So this is really a kind of grassroots research project.
That's
have you looked at sensory deprivation as maybe a way to increase the statistics at all?
Well, we use blindfolds because that is a kind of mild form of sensory deprivation. It also rules out the possibility that people are peeping using peripheral vision, so it makes it a more rigorous test. We haven't done it with people floating in salt water in isolation tanks or anything like that. No, but blindfolds are routine in this research.
Got it.
Yeah. I think so when you are thinking about or when you're looking at this type of research and this type of science or this scientific study, do you feel like it connects back to your morphic resonance field, like there's a way that we're all connected and we to one another and to nature, to greater consciousness, and that in turn is also playing out in this experience?
Well, you see, I have two main approaches to the nature of the mind. One is that I think our minds are extended in time, which is, morphic resonance. I think we're connected to the past, not just our own past, but a collective memory of humanity through morphic resonance in time. I think we're also connected to things in the future through presentiment or precognition. So I think it's the past and the future. But I think our minds are extended in space, and in two ways. First, through vision, which I've just been talking about. Secondly, we're extended and connected with people we're bonded to telepathically. And that's not distance dependent. It's a bit like quantum entanglement. It's however far you're apart, if you're closely bonded emotionally, you can be telepathically connected. Now, how this relates to morphic resonance is that morphic resonance works through fields. There's two aspects to the theory. One is the connection across time and space from the past to the present based on resonance on the basis of similarity. But how that resonance happens is because everything that's self-organizing, according to this theory, has a morphic field, a field that organizes it. And those fields are local. I mean, my morphic field's in and around my body. Your morphic field's in and around your body. Whereas the morphic resonance is non-local. It connects things at a distance through time and space. So the fields of my body help shape the body when I'm growing as an embryo. They help maintain the body, if I'm wounded or anything like that. I think the field of the body pervades the whole body. And I think where it becomes quite apparent that there's a field is when someone's had an amputation. Say they've had an arm amputated. Most people who've had an amputation have a phantom arm. They feel the arm's still there, even though it's not. And I think what they're experiencing is the field of the arm, which is, I think, where it seems to be. The official view, of course, is that it's inside the brain. There's a little arm inside the brain in a body image, and it's so referred to the place where the actual arm is. But I've done experiments on phantom arms to see if people can actually detect them. Again, we haven't moved this to the competitive level yet, but there's always potential. A phantom arm contest. Perhaps I'll say a little bit about that and then get back to vision and how it relates to morphic fields. The phantom arm, you see, I think the field of the missing arm, and we do very simple experiments for this. We find people who do subtle energy medicine like Reiki or therapeutic touch, and they claim to work with the fields of the body. This is what they do, and that's why it's subtle energy medicine. as opposed to sort of surgery and that kind of thing. So we have very simple experiments. We have the amputee, an arm amputee, goes outside a room. We shut the door, and on the door we mark 6 zones: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 areas in the door, and the person with the amputation is standing behind the door. My research assistant throws a dice to get a random number between 1 and 6. Say it's number 3. Then she asks them to push their phantom arm through panel 3. Phantom arms go through solid objects. This is amputees all have this experience. They can push it because it's a phantom. So then on the other side of the door, there's a phantom arm sticking out of panel 3 in the door, but not out of panels 1, 2, 4, and 5, and 6. So we then invite one of the subtle energy practitioners into the room, and we say, look, there's a phantom arm sticking through one of the panels of that door. It's like sticking through. Can you tell us where it is? And what they do is then with a little pendulum or just feeling, they feel the area, and then they tell us. If they say 3, they're right. If they say 4 or 5 or 6 or 1 or 2, they're wrong. And there's a 1 in 6 chance of getting it right by chance. And in these experiments, people have scored quite significantly above chance, even though this is not a familiar task. I think with practice, they could get better. So I think that the fields of the body, the morphic fields of the body, are in and around the body. And if you cut off a limb, the field's still there. And I think the fields of the mind, like perception, visual perception, I think those stretch out beyond the body. And so I think when I'm forming images, they're in mental fields, which are all around the body. And when I recognize somebody, the memory, I don't think the memory of that is stored inside my brain, the conventional view. I think it's a resonance with seeing that person in the past. It's the whole field that's resonating, the perception of that person, and the whole field is involved in the memory. I don't think the memory is just inside the brain. In fact, I think the brain's more like a TV receiver than a video recorder. I think it tunes in to resonance from the past. So I think the extended mind, you see, the idea of the mind extends beyond the brain, makes psi phenomena much easier to understand. And what makes them so controversial is the materialist theory of the mind, which is the standard theory in universities and in institutional science, which is the mind is nothing but the activity of the brain, therefore it's all inside the head. Now, if it's all inside the head, there's no way you in a martial arts training program pick up the intention of someone behind you. You can't see them, so it's not inside. Their intentions are not just inside their head, they reach out and you can feel them. But you see, all this is controversial, and the so-called skeptics are against all this because they're committed materialists. And their belief system is that the mind's all inside the head. Therefore, there's no way that I can look at somebody and affect them because my images are all inside my brain. And if I think about somebody who I'm calling on the phone, there's no way my intention could affect them hundreds of miles away because it's only changes inside my brain. And you might have a little bit of electrical activity you can detect with an EEG, but it's not going to stretch over hundreds of miles and affect someone a long way away. So that's the reason they're so opposed to all this, because it goes against this belief system. But if we have a scientific model where the mind's not confined to the inside of the brain, where vision involves extended fields, perceptual fields, then all these things make much more sense.
And how does this, I mean, it sounds a little bit, listening to it, like, what I've heard from people like Rizwan with simulation theory and Tom Campbell and like these guys talking about that there's this is a projection of who we are and we're connected with some data system or some information system that's outside of us, and we share that, and that's why we're able to get certain information, or even with spontaneous savant syndrome, where you hit your head or you get hurt and go into a coma, you come out, now all of a sudden you know how to play music that you never knew how to play. So all of these things kind of referring to that this information, we share this informational field, which reminds me of your work when it comes to, I know you like to call it the 1000th monkey theory. I mean, not monkey, rat theory. Is that correct? And so, which is, there's this other kind of like, it's not really a theory. I guess it was like kind of a fantasy or an idea, the 100th monkey idea concept, So explain that to us a little bit more, and how those things relate.
Well, I think the simulation theories are really a way, it's a metaphor, using a computer metaphor, that things are connected because they're all part of something larger than themselves. Now, I agree with that. I think we are all interconnected. I personally am not very keen on the computer metaphor because it implies the whole universe is a computer, and that implies that if God exists, God's a programmer somehow programming the computer or creating the simulation. I mean, it's not the way I think of God, and it's not the way I think of the universe. I'm a biologist, and I prefer organic metaphors to technological ones. So it may lead to the same consequences, but it's just a different metaphorical way of framing it. I think we are all indeed embedded in a greater consciousness. I mean, the traditional version of the simulation theory, at least one traditional version, is in India, where I lived for 7 years. A very common story is that the god Vishnu gets tired one day, lies down and dreams, and his dream goes on for billions of years, and that dream contains all sorts of wonderful things. And then at the end of it, he wakes up and the dream disappears. But we're part of Vishnu's dream. The whole universe is Vishnu's dream, that the whole thing is a dream in the mind of the god Vishnu. And I think I prefer that metaphor to the idea of a computer programming God and was being inside a computer. So I mean, I think that's what they're getting at, and I agree with the general principle that there's this greater interconnectedness. Now, when we come to what was the next bit of your question? I've forgotten. It was about the morphic resonance itself, or what was it?
Yeah, and I was just relating it back to your 1000 rat, concept theory.
Oh, yes.
And
yeah. Okay. Well, this is just for those who are not familiar with the idea of morphic resonance. It's the idea that of collective memory in each species, as I already mentioned, but it can be tested. And for example, there have been some tests. There was a long series with rats where they trained rats at Harvard to escape from a water maze. They had to swim to get out. And there were two exits. One was lit up and the other wasn't. And if they went out through the dim exit, they could just get out safely. If they went out through the lit exit with the light, they got an electric shock, which was obviously painful. And they tested them. Then randomly, it changed sides, the lit and the dim one. So to start with, they think, oh, the lit one's the one I can get out's on the left, so they go to the left. But then if that was lit, they'd get the shock. So they had to learn that it wasn't just where it was, but the light. Took them a long time to learn that. And then over the generations, they got quicker and quicker. And then they thought this was the inheritance of acquired characters, that the children of the rats had inherited this ability from their parents. We'd now call that epigenetic inheritance. But it was very, very controversial at the time. And so their research was repeated at Edinburgh University and at Melbourne University in Australia. And their rats started off more or less where the Harvard rats had left off. And they went on training them, and they got better, as the Harvard ones had, even better than the Harvard ones had done before them. But they also tested control rats, ones whose parents had never been trained. And those got better too. And I think that's a morphic resonance effect, you see, that once these rats have learned it, it gets easier for other ones to learn the same thing, even if their parents hadn't learned it. So this is contrasts really with something that says something rather similar, the so-called 100th monkey effect. And this was a story told by the biologist Lyle Watson in a book of his called Lifetide. And it was based on talking to some scientists in Japan who'd been studying monkey behavior. And what they'd done is taken bags of sweet potatoes to beaches on islands, and they put the sweet potatoes on the beach because the monkeys came out of the forest to feed on them. The reason they did that because they wanted to observe them, and they couldn't observe them if they were in the forest. So that's the reason they were feeding them on beaches. And then after a while, one of the monkeys found that it could get the sand off the sweet potato by just washing it in the sea. And then that spread, and soon most of the members of the group were washing their sweet potatoes. And then when they went and did this on another island, they found that the monkeys there learned to wash the sweet potatoes quicker. And they thought this was some kind of what I would call a morphic resonance effect. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what they actually observed. And Lyle Watson describes that in his book. But then he says, let us imagine for the purpose of argument that on a particular day, say Tuesday, an extra monkey, say the 100th monkey, learned how to do this. Then all of them everywhere suddenly do it. Well, that implies that it's a sudden thing, whereas the rat evidence shows it's gradual. The more that do it, the easier it gets. It's not like nothing happens and then suddenly it all happens. It's not a step function. It's like a smooth curve. But Lyle Watson made it clear he was making this up. There wasn't anyone actually observing the 100th monkey. And and from the evidence he had, he didn't know whether it was a smooth curve or a sudden step function. But at that time, he called it a critical mass. At that time, people were very obsessed with the danger of nuclear war, which after all hasn't gone away. It's still there. But the critical mass is the way atom bombs work. And so, you have up to a certain level and suddenly the bomb explodes. So he was using a nuclear metaphor, and he was sort of exaggerating the story. And then it got retold, and people would then say, oh, well, there's a story of the 100th monkey. And every time it got told, the story improved until it ended up, the 100th monkey on one island, and suddenly all over Japan, monkeys start digging up sweet potatoes, rushing to the sea and washing them. And suddenly a totally new behavior takes off everywhere instantaneously. And so these stories went round, and then the skeptics got onto this, and they said, there's no evidence for this, it's just a new age myth and that kind of thing, and debunked it. So it's always been a bit of a nuisance for me, the 100th monkey story, because what I'm saying is very like it, but I never use that example because it's often portrayed and people vaguely remember it. They usually say, I can't remember the details, and so on. And then you get these distorted versions.
Yeah. Well, taking off with this kind of smooth curve idea, and then also your morphic resonance theory, if we apply this to like psi abilities, being trained through like play and structured challenges, how would you do that? How would you reconcile the connection between the two in this idea of what we're trying to accomplish with the Psi Games, which very much is, okay, we know these abilities exist. We know there are these people out there who are extraordinary, and they have, China studied it. They've studied it in Europe. They've studied it in America. And it's been for 200 years we've been studying this type of stuff. But we need to create a way, if we want to see it develop, we need to create a way for us to advance in it. And if you could kind of just give me your take on how structured play and challenge really would help with this morphic resonance that you speak of.
Well, basically, morphic resonance says that once people have learned to do something, learned a new skill, it should get easier on average for other people to learn it. So it should be getting easier to learn skateboarding, windsurfing, all sorts of new sports, computer programming, playing particular video games. All these things should be getting easier, and actually they are. But morphic resonance isn't the only thing going on. There's training videos, there's improved technology, and so forth. So in most of the time, it's rather hard to tease these apart. So you need to have sort of properly controlled experiments to see how much of the component of this is morphic resonance. But I would think that learning any skill, including learning how to do something that's tested in a psi game, a psychic skill, should be subject to morphic resonance. If a lot of people can learn it, it should get easier for others to learn. The thing is that with the things I'm most interested in, the sense of being stared at and the telephone telepathy, no one has yet developed training methods outside martial arts, the area where people actually have trained this ability. So we don't actually know what are the best training methods. And the reason that I've got this research group that I mentioned earlier is we want people to try out what works. Are they more sensitive if they've been meditating? Does it work better after a few beers? Are they more sensitive after taking some cannabis? Well, obviously you can't do these experiments in a university setting, but this is all based on people experimenting at home with friends and family, and then letting us know what works. So we've only just launched it, so we haven't yet got anyone who's got really good at it. And if they do get really good at it, what we're going to do is ask them, how do you do it? What's your method? And we may get several different methods. And then we might be able to run training courses, training people using the methods that have been developed. And then morphic resonance should make it easier to train others. So, but the first stage, we're at the very first stage of this at the moment. And it's really a matter of finding ways of dampening down the rational thought that's going on all the time that gets in the way. The best subjects for this research on the sense of being stared at are actually children under the age of 9. In the 25-year test of this that went on in the Amsterdam Science Museum, by far the best subjects were children under 9. And I know that from my own experience, because I've been interested in this for a very long time. And when I had children of my own, I thought, well, it's a wonderful chance to do some experiments. When my son Merlin, who's now a well-known writer on fungi, he wrote a book called Entangled Life. When he was 4, I started doing staring experiments with Merlin. And to my amazement, he was right every time. I mean, he was just brilliant. I'd never seen anything like this. It was off the end of the scale. He'd never done a scientific experiment before. He wasn't cheating. I mean, he didn't know about cheating and things. I mean, it was just, and I was there all the time. I was doing the experiment with him. And I was amazed. It just worked a treat, the whole thing. Then he said, well, Daddy, why don't we do it the other way around? I can look at you. And so did it with me. I didn't get it right every time. I mean, in these tests, I score a bit above chance, but not much. And then he realized you could get it wrong. And doubt crept into his mind. And thereafter, he was quite good, but he was never as good as he was the first few times when he didn't know you could get it wrong. So this research should probably work best with young children, but you can't do these experiments with young children unless they're your own. And unfortunately, mine are now grown up. And by the time they got to be teenagers, I'm afraid that when I came up with more tests, wanted them to do them, then they said, oh, no, not another experiment. They said, how much are you going to pay us? And until they priced it out of the market. I haven't got any grandchildren yet, but I'm rather looking forward to it because I'll be able to start all over again with some of these experiments. So I think that what's really needed is ways of toning down all the normal processes that damp down our intuitive sensitivity. And it may be that substances like MDMA and cannabis make people more sensitive, and that would be really interesting if it's true. Again, as I say, this is grassroots research. I couldn't possibly put in an official application to do research with illegal drugs on something that most scientific committees would regard as pseudoscience anyway. So, this has to be done in a distributed, informal manner. Anyway,
are you having the people who stare at the other? Are you having them have any intention in their mind? Just I'm going off of what Hakeem was saying earlier, and like this intent to harm or whatever. So I wonder if like sending a negative thought or a positive thought might have a different outcome.
Well, I think that an intent to harm probably would work better, but I just don't feel I can ask people to do experiments where they project negative thoughts. I mean, martial arts is a martial art. It's about fighting. But if you're asking people to do these with their kids and things, or at home with their friends, I've just never felt I could do that. So I think it would work better, Tyler, as you suggest, if one could. But in any case, it's a bit hard to ramp up some totally artificial feeling of anger and hatred and stuff, just on demand for an experiment.
Right.
I mean, there are ways of doing this experiment to train your ability. But not only is it the question of sensitivity to being looked at, but also the power of the looks, as you're saying. That some people are much more effective than others at making people turn round. And the ideal experiment in real life, which hasn't been done yet, it could possibly be developed in some kind of games context, this would be a test for people who are good at looking. And the experiment is this. You have a building that overlooks a public space, like a railway station or a park or something like that, or on a university campus, a place where people hang around. And you're on the second or third floor, and you've got a window. You can look down on people. And you make the window so people can't see in. You can put that silvery film on the window, and it costs about $5 a roll. It's easy to make the window so no one can look in. Then what you have is a camera running, pointing down on the scene below. And then you have periods of, say, a minute where nobody's looking. And then you have periods when somebody in the window looks down at people below, focuses intention on them. And what happens then is that they turn and they look up. And it's on the camera, or you then look at the film afterwards. Do people look up more during the staring periods than the not staring periods, the control periods? And that, you see, that would be a much better test for this, because it's in real life, and it's people aren't being made self-conscious. And then you'd see whether some people are better at looking and making others turn and look up than others. And I was talking about this to some women from an organization in the United States called the Orgasmic Meditation Institute. I don't know if you've had them on your show.
No.
Meditate. Well, basically, their practice is that is for women. They sit with their legs cross-legged, and they have a partner who strokes their clitoris, not to the point of orgasm, but just to make them intensely aroused for 15 minutes. And they say this enhances the meditative experience tremendously. And I suppose it's like a kind of tantric meditation. Anyway, they teach courses on this. You have to be a woman to go to one. So, but you can be a male partner. You can also be a female partner, because they're not heteronormative. So anyway, they have a theory that when women feel, when they're ovulating, they have this strong pull thing towards attracting men, because, for evolutionary reasons, fertility and so on. And they think that they have something called the call, that when they look at people, they just have to look at them, and men will become tremendously sort of activated because of the power of their looks. So here the motive is not anger or fear, but sexual attraction. Anyway, I spoke to one of these women and asked her if she lived anywhere where she overlooked people in the street. And there were two or three of them. Two of them lived in suburban homes in Southern California, one-story suburban homes, and no one walks along streets in those kinds of places, so not very good for this. But one of them lived in Harlem, overlooking a busy street in New York City. So I asked her to try this. I mean, switch on the call, look out of your window, and see how many, look at guys and see how many of them look up. And so I asked her, how did you get on? And she said, well, it worked great, but she said, the trouble is it didn't work every time. And I said, oh, really? Well, what was the success rate? She said, well, it was only about 8 out of 10. Well, unfortunately, she's moved from Harlem, and so she's not in such a good position to do this now. But that would be another test, you see. Get women from the Orgasmic Meditation Institute to switch on the call. They say they can switch it on and off. And I tried to get them to do this experiment to test the call, because if you do it switched on and more people look up, and then switched off and fewer people look up, there'll be very good evidence for this, the quality of the look. Not only evidence for people responding to being looked at, but, the actual quality of the look, the emotion involved.
Yeah. To add to the story, I, from my military time, I had a friend who was a sniper, and I never went to the school, so I'm only just going off of his story. But he said that they were taught that when they have a target, if it's a living individual, to be emotionless, like don't project anything. So if you're looking at through the lens, through your scope at an individual, that you have to be very neutral. And he was told that because people will pick up on that, and they will often look in your direction. And then that was confirmed with a different friend who was a hunter, who told me that when he hunts, if he ever thinks about, that he's about to take the life of the animal when he's about to shoot, then the animal will like pick up on it and run away. But if he stays very neutral and then takes the shot, then the animal will just stay still. And so I find that there's anecdotal evidence to what you're saying through stories that I've heard from other people. And then also, of course, through my own lived experience with my training. Now, we still do that. Now, the way we prepare people in my school now to kind of pick up on and pay attention to their feelings about what's happening in an area is we play this game. It's called the push-pull game. And we tell them to tap into a bubble, an imaginary bubble that's around them. And then another person will stand behind them. And that person will, at whatever time they decide, will imagine they're pushing that bubble or pulling that bubble. And, the instructions to the person who's being pushed or pulled is just to let yourself go. Don't think about it. Just if you feel like you're going forward, just take a step forward. If you feel like you're going back, take a step back. And we find that a lot of people have success. Now, what I find is really interesting, which you'll like, Rupert, is that we do sometimes do this in triads. So we'll have like 3 people, and we'll have one person as the observer, and then the other 2 people partaking. And what we find too is that if you watch, you can see a person struggle with their logic and with their thinking brain versus their feeling and intuitive side, and where they will, you could see that their body is going forward and they're pushing backwards and correcting themselves, and you'll see their body shake and it moves back and forth, and then they'll eventually just go backwards, even though their body's clearly, from everybody looking on the outside, is going forward. They're just fighting it. And so that's a very unique experience too, but it really does, in my opinion, with my own experience, again, from this anecdotal experience, or subjective experience, that I've seen evidence of what you're talking about this field around a person, and then being able to affect and engage that field. And I'm a yogic practitioner, and so my teacher has taught to me about the 3 aspects. We have the subtle, gross, and causal plane. And that, and that gross plane is where we are, but like the chakras, they are actually in the subtle plane. So if you were to cut open a human body, you wouldn't actually find the chakras, but those energy centers are in the subtle plane, and they can connect the gross and the gross to the causal through this subtle plane. And so even in that concept, there's this idea of this like energetic field that lives on this subtle plane that maybe you can or cannot see. Excuse me. And to kind of tie this back to one question I have for you, at Psi Games last year, and I've seen this in my training as well, we had a bunch of kids come, and we had them in the kids' playroom, the Psi room, and the kids just were having fun with like mind sight and things of that nature. And many of the kids had not done this before. But what we found was when the first kid broke through, whether it been spoon bending or whatever, magically all the other kids could do it. And we actually had a father who was there who's a neuroscientist, and his daughter had never done anything like this. And he was wowed by it. He was just like, she's never done this before. And he was like, I want to do research on this. I got to do research on this, because all of a sudden she saw that it was possible. And then, most of the room of children, I think all of the children were able to do it once they knew it was possible. And so it kind of lends again to this, once that information or that barriers is let go in the mind, then all of a sudden this ability that's out there just kind of gets transmitted. Now, it's not as smooth of a curve as what you were talking about, but it does lend to the idea that that we're tapped in and connected to something, and that information can be shared in some way or somehow.
Very interesting, Hakeem. Yes. Well, I think this, one of the things is for people to overcome the belief they can't do it. And most grown-ups have been educated to think these things are impossible because they're made fun of in the educational and the scientific world and not taken seriously. But this thing about once a few people have done it, the rest of the group getting it, this used to happen. I've seen it myself. When Uri Geller was at the height of his fame, people used to hold spoon-bending parties. Mm-hmm. And I was at one in, I think, 1982, I mean, a very long time ago, in Cambridge, the 100th anniversary of the Society for Psychical Research conference. They had a chap from America who'd worked with Geller, and he led a spoon-bending party. I went to it, and we were all stroking spoons. And then, somebody said, mine's bending, and it really was, and you could see this bend. And then suddenly they were bending all around the room. Mine didn't bend, but most of them did. And then that evening, we were in the hall of Trinity College, Cambridge, one of the sort of 16th century hall with a big roof, wooden roof, hammer beam roof, and long tables and high table on a dais at the end, stained glass windows and things. So we're in this hall, and a formal dinner, and there was an after-dinner speech by a professor, a learned professor. It was terribly boring, his after-dinner speech. And you could see people, it was when the coffee had been served, and you could see people around the room sort of were reaching out and playing with their coffee spoons. And so many of them were bent that they had to, the Trinity College sent a bill to the Society for Psychical Research for bent coffee spoons. So these things are kind of contagious. Well, I think that's fascinating. You've had these experiences and that you also train people to do these. Mm-hmm. It'd be great if you could enlist some of your students in this scoposthesia research program, of seeing if they really can get better. It's trailblazing stuff, because if anyone can show how they can get better at it, I know that people can. Kids are good, as I just said. Animals are good at it too. I interviewed a lot of hunters myself when I wrote my book, The Sense of Being Stared At, which is where I discuss this kind of thing. I interviewed dozens of hunters and also snipers from the US Army. And they said just what you said, that you have to have a neutral thing, or once you've got, say you're deer stalking, you've got a deer in your sights, you have to shoot quickly because they'll feel you're there. And I also interviewed wildlife photographers who photograph animals through telephoto lenses, hiding inside blinds. And they said exactly the same thing, that if you've got an animal, bird or a mammal or something in your sights, a telephoto, they can't see you're hidden. But if you don't take the photograph very quickly, they'll feel it and run off. So animals are very sensitive to this as well. So as soon as we can find people who can learn how to do this and who are able to do it under test conditions, it will revolutionize this field of research. That's why I've got this app. And we already know this happens at a low level in real life, and we already know it happens with animals. We already know that martial arts people can train this ability. But what we haven't got yet is more the kind of ordinary people capable of doing it under laboratory conditions, which would open up this whole new research frontier.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have this kind of idea that like a group coherence or multiple people, a shared intention to do a thing, could amplify like anomalous phenomenon. Is that a good assessment, or is that?
Well, in the sense of being stared at isn't usually a group phenomenon. It's usually more individual. One person looks at another. I think in terms of a training situation, the reason we're setting up this research group is a bit like what you said, that if we have a group of people who are all working towards the same thing, capable of sharing their experience, it might be that with a group like that, when some people have achieved a breakthrough and find they can really do this repeatedly, it might spread to the rest of the group. I'm hoping it will. So that is, yes, part of our intention, although I don't think the group dynamic side of it isn't the main focus of this research. It's simply to see if people can get better.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at parapsychology too, I think when we're trying to measure something that would be like morphic, a resonance of increasing the psi skill, that I think the field of parapsychology has evolved the tests so much that like even nowadays we're not doing Zener card tests. So we wouldn't be able to see from 50 years ago if telepathy through this testing method has gotten better over time through all the participants. So I think having things like the Psi Games and Rupert, your app, will be able to create a standard to tell that 5 years from now, our participants getting better, because Hakeem and I had somebody on, Nelson Dellis, who was a memory champion. And what he was basically saying was these memory competitions 10 years ago, the quickest person that could figure out this task did it in like 2 minutes. Fast forward 10 years and all the participants are doing it in under like 20 seconds. So it's like the more that these, they're competing and working on it and broadly being studied and experienced, it raises the skill level of that. And I think that will happen now with Psi, that we have these, tests that we can see over time if there's a morphic resonance and a growth in that.
Yes, I'm very interested in your whole Psi Games project, actually, for that reason, because I think that if you look at any competitive sport, like the Olympic Games, the records have been broken over and over again. And the first person to run the 4-minute mile was Roger Bannister. I've forgotten when it was, 1958 or something. And now in these contests, everyone does it in less than 4 minutes. So I mean, there is an upper limit, of course. You couldn't run the mile in a second because there'd be so much friction that your jockstrap would burst into flame. There's limits to how fast it can go. But, I think asymptotically approach some kind of limit. But in the Olympic Games, in records keep being broken in every single skill. And I think that this would apply to any competitive task where those people get, partly through competition, partly through morphic resonance, that there should be a general improvement. And for years, actually, I've been suggesting something like the Psi Games. So I was very excited when I found you were actually doing it. I've been thinking of it in connection with telephone telepathy, because telephone telepathy, in my experiments, I don't know if you've read about them, but how they work is that you have the subject sits in a room, usually at home, with a landline phone, no caller ID display, being filmed. They give us the names of and phone numbers of 4 people they know very well. Telepathy works best between people who are close, emotionally close, so family members or close friends. Then we pick one of the 4 at random through a random event generator or a throw of a dice. And we ring that person up and we say, if, say, for example, Hakim's the subject, we'd say, well, this is for Hakim's telephone telepathy test. Think about him for a minute or 2 and then just ring him up. And so Hakim's sitting there, the phone rings, it's part of an experimental session. You know it's one of these 4 people. You can't guess which one by knowing their habits or patterns and things because it's random. And before picking up the phone, you say who it is. I think it's John. You pick it up. Hi, John. You're right or you're wrong. 25% chance of being right by just guessing. And we've done hundreds of these trials, and the average is about 45%. It's
wow.
Not right every time, but it's way, way above chance. And we did a preliminary test in this experiment where we tested a lot of people, and we then picked the ones who did best to do the second round of tests. And of course, the selected participants did better than the unselected participants. And we got some who were getting it right, 60, 70% of the time. And so I know that people can be better at it. Some people are better at this than others. And I think that it should be possible to set up an intuition training program. I mean, I've tried to get people to program this on smartphones so that you could actually, when the call or a text comes in, before you'd have it go through a kind of an app first, so that it doesn't just show up on the caller ID. You'd have a thing, someone's calling, someone's texting, who is it? And you'd maybe have a list of people you know well. You click on them and make your guess, and then the line would open up, and you get to see if you're right or wrong. It would keep score of how often you're right, and then you get feedback every week. Are you getting better at it? So that would be a training procedure built into a smartphone. I haven't yet found any company or developer that would do this, but I think it would even be commercially viable. People would like to train their intuition. A lot of people would. This would do it painlessly as part of everyday life. So I think that this telepathic, when we were doing these experiments, and we did have an app which worked on smartphones so people could do tests on smartphones, and the computer picked randomly the person, and we got people who were better than others. But I thought, well, it wouldn't be very difficult to set up a telephone telepathy test where you'd have national competitions or state competitions, for example, with the finals live on reality TV, where you'd have people sitting in a room just like in our tests. You make sure they hadn't got hidden smartphones on them or other devices, and then you'd see who did best, and then you'd have a prize: who's the most telepathic person in North Carolina, for example. And then if that worked, it would be TV companies would love it and media companies would love it. And then there'd be national contests, and they end up with the Telepathy Olympics. And that would be, it's the same concept as your Psi Games, you see. And but you probably think big too. I mean, so the Psi Olympics would be the next step, or at least the Psi Games. But if we got to the point where there was a Psi Olympics, then lots of people would practice these skills, because people will practice all sorts of skills that are completely useless, like gymnastic skills, so they can win competitions. And if there were real incentives to be good at Psi, then people all over the place would be practicing it. So I think Psi Games is actually quite an important concept. And the difference between you and me is you've actually done it. About it.
Well, there's 2 things about this. So my focus, and Tyler's on the executive team too, our focus is that we in 5 or now it's 4 more years, we want to do a Psi Olympics. So, and then once that happens, every 4th year of the Psi Games existence, we'll do a Psi Olympics. So the first 3 years will be regional Psi Games, one in UK, one in, Australia, one in America. And then on the 4th year, all of the different countries will get together, bring their teams, and then we'll have a Psi Olympics. And so that is actually the goal. So you maybe this is that morphic resonance.
Morphic resonance, parallel thinking. Yes, convergent evolution with morphic resonance. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's great you're thinking of that. You might consider introducing telephone telepathy as one of the Psi Games, because it's easy to get a score. Some people are better at it than others anyway. Mm-hmm. I don't know anyone who's actually practiced it deliberately to try and get better yet, but it would be perfectly feasible. And to do the experiments, you see the tests we've done where the person calls randomly selected, you can do them every 5 minutes, and you can do, say, 10 tests in 50 minutes, or you might be able to speed it up, but if you try and speed it too much, it gets difficult for people to do. Mm-hmm. But the point is, there's a defined test that's easy to set up using no more complicated technology than the regular telephones. And it can be filmed to make sure there's no cheating. There can be people, invigilators to make sure there's no cheating. And you can actually measure different levels of skill. So, I don't know if you've ever tried telephone telepathy, but I think it would adapt quite well to your Psi Games format.
Yeah, I agree. As we continue to grow, we're going to be expanding into different categories, telepathy being one of the next categories that we want to expand into. And then we have our platform, Psi Games Online, which is actually a series of games and stuff that actually I would love to talk to you about, maybe helping with, the process of your app by, doing a version of it on Psi Games Online to help you get more research. And that's part of what Psi Games Online is about. And one of the last questions that I have for you is that, I know, because I watched your TED Talk, that at one point you were very controversial, and I think they even pulled down your TED Talk and all this stuff, and it was just really, it was so well done. It really blew my mind. So I really want to talk to you about this, because I am getting pushback, and there's been other people who've gotten pushback about how Psi's not real and this, that, and other, and I'm like, well, it's like almost 200 years of peer-reviewed study and evidence out there that show that there's a phenomenon. Now, to what degree and how high some of these different psi abilities are, maybe we could talk about that, but ultimately it's there. But the average person just doesn't know, and then you have people like yourself who's doing all this research and have these great talks like the TED Talk, and then there's whole organizations that want to take your stuff down. How do you feel about that, and what do you think? How do you think we get past that? What do you think is creating that? And then how do we get past it?
I think what's creating it is this materialist worldview. It's a belief system. And that was the belief system I was talking about in my TED Talk. And the reason it was taken down is because some militant materialists were deeply offended by it, because for them, this is the truth. They don't see it as a belief system or a model of reality that's temporary model. They think they've found the truth, and they think the truth is that the universe is made of unconscious matter following blind mathematical laws entirely purposelessly, that evolutions happen basically by chance mutations and natural selection, and that our minds are nothing but the activity of our brains inside our heads. That's what they believe. And what's in it for them is they think that this is science, this world's view. It isn't science, it's just a philosophy of nature that dominates science at the moment. But what's in it for them is it reinforces an atheist worldview. And most of the militant ones are militant atheists. They're passionately anti-religion. The people who got my TED Talk taken down, P.Z. Myers and Jerry Coyne, are both militant atheists and materialists. And so for them, this was deeply offensive, blasphemy. It was blasphemy because I'm a scientist and I ought to know better, which is why they get so angry about what I do. And you know, the fact I'm a Christian, it doesn't help because from their point of view, they think, well, if I have a religious belief and I think God exists, then what I've done is distorted all my thinking to fit into a preconceived dogma without seeing that actually that's exactly what they're doing themselves. I'm not doing what I do because I think it's an important part of the Christian belief system. A lot of Christians aren't very interested in Psi. Some are very skeptical about it. So it's certainly nothing to do with my religious views. So their reason for resisting it and being so much pushback is because they're so committed to this worldview, this belief system. Then I think they've got these skeptical organizations like the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, which publishes the Skeptical Inquirer. I actually subscribe to it, so I know what they're up to. I think it's important to track what they're doing. And so I get a regular dose of this skeptical stuff. And most of their mailings are appeals for funding. You know, we need more money, even more money than we've got already, because we've got to push back against the tide of superstition that's engulfing the world and threatening civilization. They see themselves as defenders of reason and science against a tide of irrationalism and superstition that's engulfing civilization. You know, so they have a kind of apocalyptic view with themselves as the good guys in the front line, small number of good guys holding back these dark forces. That's their self-image. So getting my TED Talk taken down was a kind of righteous step in their war against superstition and so on. And so that's how they see it. And their biggest arena of activity, where they're most effective, is in Wikipedia. As you probably know, there's a group of editors called guerrilla skeptics on Wikipedia who are militant skeptics who train up editors, and they've captured whole areas of Wikipedia. My biography page, for example, they've controlled for at least 15 years. And anyone who tries and edit it to make it look as if I'm a reasonable biologist and proper scientist is immediately reverted or taken down. Basically, what it says is that I'm a pseudoscientist, and what I do is pseudoscience, and I investigate the paranormal, which, in their words, means pseudoscience or unreal. And they've edited all the pages to do with telepathy, parapsychology. The parapsychology is defined as pseudoscience, and then telepathy and clairvoyance and all these other things are therefore basically pseudoscience. And they have an iron grip on Wikipedia, and this has a very big effect because now all the AI search engines scoop up the stuff from Wikipedia. If you do a search on me, my name, on Google, then on the right-hand side, there's the top two lines from Wikipedia, which say, morphic resonance is pseudoscience and so on. So they deliberately do this to distort the whole public opinion. So anyone who does a Wikipedia search or an AI search, which has now incorporated all this Wikipedia material, is going to have this anti-Psi prejudice reinforced. So one thing that could be done, I don't have the capacity to do it, but one thing that could be done would be to find a group of Wikipedia editors who would actually take on the guerrilla skeptics, people who actually bring about what Wikipedia is supposed to do, present a neutral point of view, not a biased point of view that is only negative towards these things. So that would be a very good activist campaign to have people who would actually take on the guerrilla skeptics. And right now, the occasional editor goes on and tries and corrects things, and then they all gang up on them and get them struck off. And in many cases, they've had them actually banned from editing Wikipedia. So that does a lot of harm to the public perception of Psi, and because Wikipedia is so influential, and even more so now these AI machines have scraped Wikipedia and put all that stuff in the AI searches. So that's one thing, I think, which is a serious impediment to research in the area. I find that for most people, most ordinary people, there's very little resistance to Psi. They're not against it because they've experienced it. And, I write articles about telephone telepathy, psychic pets, and so on in some of our mass circulation British newspapers, the Daily Mail particularly, second most widely circulated paper in Britain, and after the BBC, the top website in Britain and in the world, among the top 10. A huge circulation. And the Daily Mail is a newspaper which is not in a kind of New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal level. It's more popular, more like USA Today, that kind of thing, but very, very mainstream. But the editors of it, they know that their readers are interested in these things, so they publish quite positive articles on it, and they don't have any problem with this. The people who have the problem with it are things like intellectual papers like New York Times or The Guardian or the London Times, whose readership are university graduate demographic, and they just feel they have to maintain these taboos, otherwise they'll be accused of being irrational, superstitious, feeble-minded, etc. So I don't think ordinary people have a problem. When I wrote my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, about psychic dogs and psychic animals in general, it was a bestseller in the US and in most other countries. I was on USA Today, mainstream TV programs, because this wasn't framed as fringe science. It was framed as something really interesting to dog owners, which it is. My book wasn't fringe in Barnes and Noble and stuff. I went into one in New York and I didn't find it in the science section. I found it in the dog section next to dogs or pet grooming sort of stuff. So there's no problem with most dog owners. If you say, does your dog know when you're coming home? Lots of them say yes. And they don't say, wow, this is an incredibly paranormal phenomenon, it's taboo in science. They just take it for granted. They take telephone telepathy for granted. They take the sense of being stared at for granted. These are not controversial as soon as you step out of the academic world. So I think one of the things we can actually do is try and correct the false information and highly biased information on Wikipedia, which distorts the public perception. Another thing is to have these things taken seriously within the educational system. Right now, there's almost no universities where you can do research on this or even talk about it, except it all. And in schools, it's just simply ignored. And I think it would, what will happen really, if the Psi Games succeed, and the reason I had a similar idea is that if people are winning contests for telepathy or for these skills, then they must be real. You can't win a contest for something that's just make-believe or some private fantasy. So that's why I think your endeavor is also part of this paradigm shift.
Well, I have an invite for you, and you don't have to answer now, so I'm not putting you on the spot. But 2027, we have decided that we're going to do a Psi Games in Manchester. And we will start doing that every year after this. And so I would love for you to be a keynote speaker at that if you are willing. And then we'll also have to build an advisory board. And I would love for you to be a part of the advisory board for the Psi Games team or, UK team. And that way we can start to develop this out and do that. And we'd love to make you a part of the movement. Again, I know that you've been doing this for a long time and you may just want to relax and do your thing. But, it'll be an invite. And again, don't answer it yet because it might be no, and we don't want that on the air and all that stuff.
Well, we can discuss it later, but I like what you're doing and I think it's really important. So, and I think that, if you can expand the realm, like you're planning to start doing telepathy tests and so on, your best bet, I think, would be telephone telepathy, much better than all these card-guessing type protocols. Telephone telepathy is much closer to real life and and most people have experienced it. So anyway, yes, well, certainly let's keep up the conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tyler, do you have any questions? I know you have one type of question you always like to ask.
Yeah, well, the Wikipedia is definitely in the UAP realm as well. They're dealing with that. But my question was actually, my dog was barking in the background right on cue. But you mentioned a little bit about studies that you're doing with pet telepathy. And I've got cats myself. Sometimes they'll jump on my chair. But I wonder, like, what is your current research in terms of what you're doing to test that? And can people test it at home with their pets?
Well, they certainly can. Yes, with dogs and cats, the does your dog or cat know when you're coming home? That's the first thing. I've written about this in my book. But when I was doing that research primarily in the 1990s, and then we had clunky camcorders with limited filming time. People now have webcams, surveillance systems, and you can even put things on the collar of dogs or cats to track where they are. It's much easier now to check out whether they know when people are coming home, to study this. So that needs more research. One reason I've reopened research on cats that know when their owners are coming home is no one's ever done a filmed experiment with cats. We've got several with dogs. And no one's done a filmed experiment. No one's published a paper in a scientific journal about cats. And this is easy to do research at home. If you've got a cat that does seem to know when a member of the family is coming home, it would make a great high school project or science fair project or student project for an undergraduate in animal behavior. Then there's the question of dogs and cats waking up when they're being stared at. One of my most recent papers was called, "Is it possible to wake sleeping dogs and cats by staring at them?" The answer is yes. And so one of my things here is to, again, lots of people have dogs and cats. They sleep quite a lot of the time, easy to do. And so the slogan for this research is, "Don't let sleeping dogs lie." Stare at them and see if they wake up. And if they do, then this could lead itself to filmed experiments. You film the sleeping dog, you stare at randomized times, and you see whether the dog wakes up. So that's a very easy experiment to do at home. Then with cats, there's a simple telepathic experiment. A lot of people have found that they can call their cat from a different room, or even when it's outdoors, by just mentally, instead of shouting "puss, puss, come here," or "food time," or something like that, they just mentally think about giving the cat a treat and will the cat to come to them. And lots of people have found that when they do this, the cat may have been asleep in a different room, and it'll come padding into the room a minute or so later. And again, that could be done for experiments. You could film the dog, the door that the cat will come through into the room, have the camera running continuously, have a randomized time when you think of calling the cat, and see if it comes in response to the calls. So that's a telepathic call. I discuss this research in my book, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home. But these experiments that I've just described are ones that will be much more feasible now than the research I did back then, because it's so much easier to film things and record things because of the advances in technology. So those are some ways in which people can actually do experiments with dogs and cats at home in a way that costs nothing, is fun, and dogs and cats don't mind doing these things, especially if they're rewarded. If you reward a dog for waking up when you stare at it, and it learns that this is a behavior that gets rewarded, it'll become more sensitive and more interested in being woken up. Otherwise, they just get a bit pissed off with being woken up needlessly. But they can be trained. And so you haven't yet moved into phase 2, which is pet Psi Games, but I want to know about that too. So
I love it. I love it. Well, Rupert, thank you so much for everything. I think I would say go ahead and give us your information, but you did that several times throughout it, so we know where to contact you. And this is a very, very much a delight for me. I followed you for a long time now, and I definitely want, someone like yourself to be involved with what we're doing, because it really is important for me for the Psi Games to be cross-generational, for us to honor the people who have done the research, especially in the hard times, like, what you had to deal with getting taken down and all this other stuff. And as we move towards the future, where, very soon here, a lot of people will be out of jobs due to AI and robotics, and they'll have plenty of time to do something. And maybe this would be one of those fields that could help us stay sane and evolve to our next stage of, our human species evolution. And so I thank you. And Tyler, I thank you for being here today. And until next time, my friends, we'll see you later.
Good. Thank you.